for November 14th. I see we have everyone present. It's good to see all the members here, Chief, Madam Secretary. Are there any speakers tonight?
No, there are not.
All right. Then I guess I would ask if there's a motion for the consent agenda. Or any questions?
I so move.
Second.
Madam Secretary, call for the question.
Directors Jones,
Aye.
Monk,
Aye.
and Scheidegger.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, very good. I think we'll move right into the finance report. Ms. McFarland? Good evening.
Rhonda McFarland, Chief Financial Officer.
Oops.
Okay. And trying to get it to work, I moved it ahead here. So let's see if that'll take it back. There we go.
There we go.
This evening, we're going to talk about our financial results for the first 2 months of our new fiscal year that began July 1st. And these reports are on the modified accrual basis. The first report covers all of the first graph covers all of our funds, and it shows our cash balance. And you can see that it fluctuates, and the main reason that we see fluctuations have to do with the funding that comes from property taxes at various times during the year. So we don't expect anything until probably January. And so what I can say is if we look at the current year, which is the green line, our new fiscal year 2014, we have about $500,000 more than we had a year ago. And that's even after we have started setting money aside outside of our general fund for our post-retirement medical pre-funding. This next graph just covers the general fund, and it shows our reserve levels, which is basically after we take a look at our assets and our liabilities, what do we have left over? And we started out the year at $14.7 million, and that was significantly more than what we had the year earlier, which was around $8 million. And we actually project that by the end of the current fiscal year, we'll be at about 18 million. So we're pushing our way up towards the 15% goal that we have for our reserve levels that was adopted in our new reserve policy. Okay, going on to the revenue for the first 2 months. Our medic cost recovery year-to-date, $4.9 million. It's up $557,000 or 12.9% from the prior year. And since this is just through August 31st, I will tell you that we continue to be tracking very close to our budget. Everything's right on track where we should be. Community risk reduction year-to-date, $244,000, up $50,000 from the prior year. And that's, or 26.1% increase, and that's only 9% of budget. So this particular revenue source is from two different areas. Plan review and also inspections are the two primary sources for the cost recovery from community risk reduction. At the present time, there aren't any inspections that are being scheduled. There is a review going on to look at the equity of these fees between our various commercial businesses, and until that is completed, which will be coming to the board at a future meeting, we do expect to fall below budgets until that activity picks up. But as far as plan review, at August 31st, and through the current, we are tracking exactly at budget, which we projected a 10% increase, and that's where it's coming out at. For our other charges, we're at 1.3 million compared to 1.2 million. All of the things in that area are also tracking to budget. So overall, we have a 16.2% increase from the prior year.
Ms. McFarland, can I ask a question if the chair wouldn't mind? On the other charges for services, it says year-to-date revenue of 1.3 million is 1.2 million higher than the prior year.
Yes.
Okay,
So
I
I
didn't-
stand corrected. I'm sorry. Thank you for that correction. And I will tell you, though, that these are the things for some of the other services that we do, like the work out at McClellan with the Coast Guard and with the fire service out there. And as such, it really is pretty reliable revenue, unlike some of the other areas where, you know, it depends on the activity level of what's going on as far as either plan review or the services that are done by our medics.
And I'll just add one other thing on the community risk reduction slide. We're on target with where we want to be. They've revamped the program. That'll be coming to you in December for the first hearing. We're currently out in the field meeting with all the stakeholders, and then it'll come back again in January, and that's all within the schedule of the plan and when they would actually start the new style of inspections and stuff. So we're still going to be very, very close to target on budget on the overall. That's my understanding.
Good, thank you.
Okay, going on to expenditures, we have labor costs of 19.3 million. That is net of 1.5 million in concessions. As you know, we had additional concessions last year where our employees are sharing not only the pension costs, but some of our medical benefit costs as well. Labor costs were at 14.71% of the labor budget. Being two months into the year, we should be around 16%, so we're well under that, but our overtime is at 34.4%. So that did give me some pause, and so I did meet with the Deputy Chief of Operations and the Deputy Chief of Administration, and we went over some of the numbers, and it appears that this spike has to do with the deployments that took place during those months. And I actually have some information that I wouldn't have had last month. And altogether, we had sent our firefighters and medics out to 8 different wildfires between July 1 and August 31st. And in total, there was labor charges that we will recover from the various agencies that we assisted in the amount of $1 million. The largest of which is from the Rim Fire, which there was about $505,000 in labor costs and a total of $642,000, and that being the difference being some engines and support vehicles, as well as some administration costs that we recover. So we have, you will be seeing that in future numbers. So that will make that number go down considerably.
Okay.
Now, service and supplies, we're at 4.5 million, or 23% of budget. So again, that's higher than the 16% of the year that's gone, but we don't spend those service and supply costs evenly during the year. And in going back and looking at why it was above 16%, it was primarily from 3 different things. There was our comm center costs that we just pay twice a year. So we paid 1.8 million of our total for the, and that represents 50% of the total for the year. And that's all in those costs right now. And we also paid all of our insurance. We pay that at the beginning of the year. And in addition, I could see there were various equipment orders that took place where certain things were budgeted, and once they're ordered. So that's what's bringing that number up. So I don't think there's anything that we have to be concerned about at this point in the year.
Kind of front-load spending, in other words.
Yes.
It'll even out.
Yes. Okay, going on to the Capital Facilities Fund, our year-to-date development fees were $150,000. This is 10.7% of budget, so it's below the 16%. We don't receive these revenues evenly during the year. It fluctuates depending on the building activity. I will tell you, the most recent reports I've looked at, we are right on budget. So. Okay, and then the last thing I'll comment on has to do with our grants, and there are items on our board agenda where you'll be talking about grants this evening. And there's, to date, expended 580, or to the August 31st date, $581,000. We have an additional $5.7 million of approved grant funding to be spent through the rest of the year. As that number will go up as we get new grants, and there were, at August 31st, there were 3 pending for a total of $1.7 million. So that number, you'll see some changes. I don't want to scoop the grant people, so there you go. Any questions?
Directors, any questions, comments? Nope. Very good report. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
While you're here, would you mind talking to us about actuary reports?
I would love to talk to you about our actuary report. I tried to speed through the financials since I know that this is a lot of information that I'll be going over on our most recent actuarial report that we received. Okay, so the first thing that I'll say is this report we received in October from CalPERS, and it was the, as of June 30th, 2012, we received our report for our safety portion of our pension. And I'll talk a little bit later about the two types of pensions that we have for our employees. But the one thing that I want to emphasize here is just the lag in timing on the information. This report uses payroll and demographics and everything as of June 30th, 2012. So it's always about 2 years lag, and the new information that we get in this report is the basis for the subsequent years' percentages of payroll that we have to contribute. So this report gives us information on what we will be contributing for fiscal year 2015. We are currently in fiscal year 2014. So just thought I would emphasize that to start off with. Our two plans are the safety plan and the miscellaneous plan. The safety plan is the majority of our employees, our safety personnel, and it's a standalone plan that we fund entirely for our employees. The miscellaneous plan is in a risk pool. We have not been given that actuary report. We are expecting to get that by the end of the month. It's a very small portion of our total pension costs. We are in a risk pool because we have less than 100 employees, and any plan with less than 100 employees, they mandated to go into a pool with other people with a similar formula. So every other plan that had a small number of participants in it with our formula, 3% retirement age 60, are in the same pool with us. And
Statewide?
Statewide.
Wow.
And that's to have a little bit more smoothing on the demographics. And I could be a whole nother report, so I'm going to keep going. As far as our number of participants, I've divided it into two different categories. We have our active employees, and that's the blue bars, and I show that we have 515 active employees in the safety and 68 in the miscellaneous. And the red bar represents retirees and other, and there's 235 in the miscellaneous and 941 in the safety. And I think it's important to see that, it's a much larger number than the number of active participants that we have. And then I just kind of split it out again, the other and the retired, so that you can see that broken out a little bit, that we have 561 retired Metro participants and in safety, and 114 in our miscellaneous. The other represents two different things. It can be someone that left here and is still participating in CalPERS at another employer, and when they go to retire, the portion of their pension that they earned here would then be funded by our plan. And then otherwise, it can be someone that just terminated government employment and just left their money on account at CalPERS. And if they have a minimum of 5 years, there's some level of pension for them in the future. Their other option, of course, is to withdraw it, which many of them do that aren't vested. Now, this is this slide. I'm focusing now on safety, since that's the majority of our cost, and that's the actual report that we received. And based on the information in the report, we will see in the fiscal year 2015 budget a $1.2 million increase. It's 2%. And it's changing our rate from around 34% to around 36%. And what it is that percentage is multiplied by the pensionable wages to determine what our contribution is. So I tried to put down here what the dollars and what the percentages are, and I've split it into two categories. And I passed out to you, and I also have a few more available if anybody in the audience wants them, but the appendix that talks about the glossary of definitions that go along with the report, since there's a lot of terms that you may or may not be familiar with. But they refer to the costs that we're paying for the current year's activity for our current employees as normal cost. And then if there's any prior years that they feel, based on their calculations, that weren't funded adequately, then they refer to that as the unfunded actuarial liability. And that is amortized over various periods. And so that's the red portion of the bar. So what's interesting to see, and I brought my pointer, is that the normal cost in 14 is bigger than the unfunded liability from the past. And then you go into 15 and it's actually smaller. We're paying more for things that weren't funded in the past than what we were actually paying for the current participants. And I thought that was pretty interesting. So anyway, we'll go on and we'll talk about.
Would we expect that trend to continue, for that red portion to continue to grow?
No, I don't think so. I think, it is growing, and it will be growing, but they're also requiring larger amounts. So I think that you may see it continue to grow, but then eventually it's going to come back down, because they're being fairly aggressive on the amount of contributions that they're asking us to make. And they're also making decisions that have made that unfunded liability grow. And that's some of what we're going to talk about in the subsequent slides here. And we can always come back to this slide at the end if you'd like, because I think it's kind of a key slide. This is just a graph from 2005 of our unfunded portion of the liability all the way through this 2012 report. So it's pretty steep. And this is just using what we call the actuarial value of assets, which is kind of a smoothing method that they use to determine your asset value. And then this This one is a little confusing, but I think once I explain it, it'll have more meaning to you. What I tried to do here is the green line is the total employer contribution, and on the left is showing actual activity from 2006 through 2012's report, and then in parentheses I indicate what fiscal year that's impacting. So the first date has to do with the reports come out every effective of a June 30th. So for example, in our current year that we're in, the 2011 report is what affected the current year. So did I get off a year on that stuff? If I did, I'm sorry.
Looks like there's about a 2-year.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, PERS is always arrears 2 years.
Right, so anyway, this is the total, and I put a line here between the actual and what they're projecting off into the future. So they are showing that, that the rates are continuing to grow, and that is from the unfunded liability. But what this agency did is that we had concessions made by our employees. We initially, there was no sharing of costs with our employees, and then beginning in fiscal year 2011, there was a sharing of costs with the employees such that now our employees are paying 12% of that cost. So this red line represents the share that we actually pay of the green line. So this part in here is being paid for by our employees. And this is the part that our costs actually went down because of the concessions. And now they're with some of the things that we're going to talk about in just a moment is why this continues to go up. Okay, so why are rates going up? And I know Chief Hinkey's going to help me with some of this stuff because he's definitely paid close attention to some things that have been going on at CalPERS. One of the first things that impacted our rates was an interest assumption change. The interest rate prior to the fiscal year 13 and 14 had been 7 3/4, and the board of CalPERS made a decision to lower that interest rate assumption. And we will be talking about each one of these items subsequent. I have some information on the history of the earnings at CalPERS and so forth. And each one of these I have a separate slide. So this is kind of like a summary of what we're going to talk about, and then I have detail behind it. So that was one of the things that impacted the current rates that were being charged. In addition, there were some earnings shortfalls. 2008, 2009, there were, in 9, I think in particular, there was like a negative 20%. So there was a huge difference between the assumed rate and what the actual earnings were. And that had a large impact on all CalPERS employers up and down the state. In addition, for the current report, the return on the assets as of June 30th, 2012 was 0. So they were off by the 7.5%, which is now their assumed rate. In addition, that rate is spread over the salary base. So when you start shrinking your labor costs, which we've done during this recession, it ends up having an inverse effect on your interest rate. It goes up. So those are the 3 largest things that impacted the rates, the unfunded liability going up. And just to kind of give you an example, when they change assumptions, you still got the same retirees getting the same pension, but then all of a sudden they're saying they're not going to earn as much, then it makes that liability increase. And not only for the current employees, but for employees that are actually retired. On the projected rates, this is something that there's 3 different things going on. They, when they do the smoothing, they use, I emphasized on that prior slide, the actuarial values that they use for the assets. They are changing starting in the next fiscal year and basing those on market values. So we're going to take a look in a little bit about how much difference is there between what they've traditionally used and what these market values look like.
And I would just add that that was That was a GASB 45 thing that was pushed by a certain industry to do that, and that probably had the largest movement of increasing people's unfunded liability, number one. And then I'll both professionally and personally inject this, is that if you watch the professionals, they don't invest based on one-year market. They invest over 30 years for the long term. However, they've decided now to do it on the one-year basis of market value. And we know, and you'll see slides that Rhonda's done an excellent job on, about not only the average rate of return, which is substantially higher than 7.5% over 30 years, but on the actuarial, when you talk about market values, what that impact has had to us as well. So it's kind of like putting somebody in the big glass box with the dollar bills or $100 bills blowing around and grabbing as much as you can. They have glue on their hands, and I think the reason that they're doing that is they really are trying to, a term you used earlier, front load and get as much capital as they can into the system.
Right, thank you. Yeah, Mr. Chair, that was my concern a few slides ago, where it was every year they can change this. What kind of, no one does, it's not really a question, more of a comment, but how did, so PERS can come back every year and say they're changing this projection?
And
Yes, and they do.
Yeah, and they do, but it's based on now GASB 45 that says, am I correct on that?
68.
Guess 68, I thought it was
45 is-
54.6
Yeah, well-
subsection A, but anyway, somewhere in there, because I don't watch that, but she's right, I'm being facetious. It was as I like to use the term, the professional bean counters that decided we should start looking at the actuarials in this fashion, and it drops us substantially on our unfunded liability, as it did in a lot of places up and down the state. And so I like to refer to that, of all the things that CalPERS has done, they've been forced to do this one by those GASB regulations. But as a president of the United States in 1981 referred to it as kind of voodoo economics. And so I think it's something that they're being very conservative. I can guarantee you that by us doing it this way and following that, we'll be putting more than enough money away, I think, for the future. But it really kind of sets a false expectation, at least in my opinion. Go ahead, Rhonda.
All right, then the next thing that they're doing that is increasing rates is changing the asset smoothing method. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a little bit more detail later, but it's basically taking something where they had kind of a rolling amortization and making it a fixed 30 years. So at the end of the 30 years, you will absolutely be 100% funded, unless, of course, they change another assumption on you, then they'll let you kind of work it out again. But that also will have a large impact on those future rates. And then the third item is pension reform. They have not reflected pension reform in any of the projections. Now, the state's pension reform was effective January 1, 2013. So it really shouldn't be reflected necessarily in the rates, for the current time. But when they are projecting out and they're going into 15, that would be a year that would include a year ending in June 30th, 2013, and not reflecting any of the changes that were made in pension reform, and they were very significant. So they're including the things that are increasing costs, and they're not including the one item that would actually bring the costs down. So I would think that our plan is going to be very well funded when you're reducing benefits and increasing contributions. And then the last two items are things that are currently being reviewed by CalPERS, and they periodically review these. They have a cycle they go through, and so they're up to review the economic and demographic assumptions. And the last time that they did that, it actually increased our unfunded liability about $2 million a year. So, or the funding that we had to make, the contribution was impacted by that. And then the investment portfolio asset allocation, they actually had workshop this week, and I listened to that. And the impact on that is if they choose to go with a more conservative portfolio, then again, they would have to lower the assumed interest rate. I didn't hear anything in that meeting that led me to believe that they will do that, but that is what's being discussed.
And, go ahead.
Go ahead, Chief.
I was just going to add, at least from the sources that I have, it seems very unlikely that PERS is going to initiate any more changes in the short term. The last one that they have to deal with is in January or February, and that will be the mortality, which means that I'm going to, if you can imagine this, live to 106. I'm just being facetious, but they're going to increase the age of retirees. But even at that, I believe that that probably would be spread out, and you're probably not going to see any implementation of something like that for the next 2 or 3 years. So that's kind of the last thing on the horizon. And as Rhonda said, she was at their deal where they did a straw poll, and basically there's no inclination. You know, they're considering dropping the rate of return from 7.5 to 7.25, if you remember. And they think they've realized that if they do that, they're going to push a lot of municipalities over the edge of the cliff. And I think her next slide shows you there why that really is not necessary.
Okay. Well, this is the historical returns from CalPERS over the last 30 years, and the 30-year return of 9.5% far exceeds their assumed rate of return. Where we've had trouble is during this recession, and you can see the 5-year return at 3.8%. And the good news is for the year that ended June 30th, 2013, which will be our next report that we get a year from now, they had a healthy 12.5% return. And they have factored that 12.5% positive return into their projections of future rates. So, you know, one of the things I talked about was that this agency has done a good job of containing costs as far as compensation goes. And so our wages have gone down. It was a high of pensionable wages of about $70 million. And we currently are where this little star is. We're at about 62 million. And this is the line that have been showing up in our report as far as our wages go. So they're never quite on. They try to project, but one of the things that they have as an assumption is that we give raises, and this agency hasn't had any raises since 2008. And so COLA raises, we have had step increases for newer employees, but for the most part, there's been no raises. And so what happens is, first of all, they're expecting us to have a larger wage base, so they base the percentage on that. And then when in comes the money, it's less than what they expected, so that unfunded liability goes up again. And then that interest rate ends up even higher because now they know they have to put it over a smaller number of active participants. So it's like something that we did that was very positive to keep our budget balanced has a inverse effect when it comes to our contribution rate. Okay, so this is the valuing of assets under the two different methods, the market value versus the actuarial value. And I'm showing as of June 30th from 2008 through 2012 what it looked like. And there was only one time when our market value was actually higher than the actuarial value. And that's, so the blue bar is traditionally how they valued the assets. And you can see that it's a very consistent and smooth type of thing where when you start valuing based on market value, it's going to fluctuate as the market always does. So you will see based on this change that we will have a lot of more volatility in the rates that we receive each year.
And what I'd like to add to that, because I think it's important for the people that are sitting at home especially, is that we've been a very proud district of being 78, 80% funded. That's the minimum recommendation. And we've worked very, very hard to keep that. And with the stroke of a pen and the change of a regulation, they artificially now take you down to 66%. And you can see that in the 2012 column. You go from 78 to 66. And because we're in this ability to do this, we have the ability to kind of lay it out there and be straight shooters on this. You know, that is that is shocking to me, because what that to me is pouring gas on the pension issue that didn't need to be poured on the pension issue. It was something that was done that they knew that this was going to drastically drop the unfunded liability. And so when people are at home and they're watching how they invest in their investment portfolio people on their 401k or their 457, tell them you need to be looking long-term for the next 30 years, they've decided again to go with this year-by-year market value. So when you look at 2010 and some of the ones where 2009 where the stock market basically tanked, when I like to refer to the skim went on, you can see the volatility, and then you would have people jumping up and down going, oh my gosh, these retirement funds are so underfunded now. And that's really not the accurate picture. And so I want the people at home to at least understand that that's what's going on. This was a stroke of a pen, the change of a regulation that made this actually happen.
Okay, the amortization of the unfunded liabilities, presently it's rolling 30 years, and as I mentioned before, they're changing it to a fixed 30 years, and that's what's being used for the projected rate. And so you will always pay a certain amount that's going to be paid off at the end of 30 years. So they will never, so I guess basically when you get to year 30, you're pay as you go for any gains or losses.
Yeah, I think the difference, which is good that PERS did, they did a lot of good things here. I'm not being overly critical. But pension holidays, you can remember when municipalities were 100% funded and 110% funded. One of the things that got us into that, not this district, but other municipalities, took that money savings, and they didn't have to pay into the retirees' pension. So even though the retirees or the active employees were paying their 9% of CalPERS, their contribution, the municipality was super funded, so they never put any money into the retirement system. They used it for parks and streets and whatever other issues that came up that were important projects to them, or in some cases to give raises on one-time money, which was not good either. And so at the end of the day, one of the things that's nice about this will be that they no longer get pension holidays. So in the law, if you become 100% funded, even if it happens quicker than what we're assuming with the massive influx of cash, I believe they will get there sooner. There will be no pension holiday, so you will continue to put the money in. It's both the employee and the employer. And then when they have another recession of like the one we came through, which we hope we don't, but most likely will happen, you've got extra cash in there to make up for that, and we don't see those wild swings in what the municipalities and the districts have to contribute.
Okay, PEPRA, Public Employer Pension Reform Act. You'll see it, it's commonly referred to as PEPRA. Benefits were lowered for new employees that were not participating in CalPERS after January 1st, 2013. So any new hire that we have that was not previously a participant in CalPERS comes under new benefit levels that are considerably lower. The amount of the cost savings is dependent on how much turnover you have. And for us, when you look at both the people that are going into retirement from our active employees, plus that other group that could be retiring from another agency, we're probably in the range of 45 employees a year. Just with our active employees, last year I think we were 38, and then we had more that came from that other group. So, plus we have periodic terminations for other reasons and people going on to other employers, et cetera. So we do have new employees coming in that have never been in CalPERS before. And so we will have a lower cost for them. And in the long term, we will see that savings, but it just seems to me a little bit one way when you're projecting increases and not projecting decreases. Now, they can't determine, what that turnover is going to be, but they have assumptions that they use for this whole calculation on how many people are going to retire at any given time. So at a minimum, they could have put those numbers in, and they chose not to.
And it's my understanding that their intention is to spread that over 20 years. So agencies will not see the drop off. And again, I think that's because what they're trying to do is keep the maximum amount of cash investment going in up front and not calculating those savings and giving the discount so that they build the system to a much more healthier level. The bottom line is it the right thing to do for the promises that we've made? Yeah, it's going to make the system a lot healthier, but it's going to be a little bit more of a draconian way of getting there. And I think that's an outflow of the disaster that we saw over the last 4 or 5 years. And when the market dropped out in the one CalPERS year of 24% negative performance, you know, everybody went, oh my gosh, we should be getting investment returns only of 1 or 2%. You heard people, pundits, say that, well, we should only expect to get a rate of return of 1 or 2%. You actually heard people say that, when in actuality, it's averaged 9.5. So I think a lot of it was knee-jerk. The upside of that is going to be is that we're going to be putting a lot into the system a lot sooner than we would have normally. And in the long run, that will make us a much healthier system, a much healthier retirement, and a lot more stable.
So what I hear you saying, the two of you in essence on this, is that the calculations for the unfunded don't really take into account the actual rate of the PEPRA gains, if you will, in the unfunded.
Yeah, they never.
Better, in essence. as time
Exactly,
goes
they
on.
will get better, because the more people you hire with, the less benefit.
Lesser benefits, less
That's, you know, we're going to be hiring a ton of people, and have been hiring. How many, Chief, have we hired under the new, would you estimate?
Well, I don't know exact number of the new, but 160 new people in the last couple of years.
Okay,
Well, and
It's a big number.
and that's why I think eventually what's going to happen is we're going to hit that unfunded, that funded status a lot quicker than what people think. And I think they won't say this, but I think that's exactly what they want to do, so they don't have to deal with what they dealt with over the last 3 or 4 years, where people were running around saying the sky was absolutely falling.
Well, and I'm
Good insight.
going back to that one slide that we talked about in the beginning, and I'm going to change my answer that I gave you. I think that red is going to continue to grow, because the piece that we just talked about, the part with the PEPRA, that's what's going to make this blue number actually go down, our normal cost. So I do think, you know, giving it more thought, that it is, you're going to see that trend continue. But I think,
The unfunded grow is what you're saying.
well, the ratio grow.
Okay.
But they are having us put a lot more money towards it. So after, you know, going through all these numbers and doing a lot of analysis work and thinking a lot about this, putting this presentation together, you know, I came to the conclusion that we are going to have a better funded plan, but based on the changes that they've made, it's going to look as if we're worse. So, anyway, I just felt that this was important enough to spend all this time on, and I thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions or comments, just let me know.
At this point.
No, thank you.
Well, I think this was excellent insight, and I don't know about my two colleagues here, but I would appreciate if I could get a copy of this. It'd be very helpful to keep and be able to refer to, and I appreciate the glossary. Lots to learn and see. I didn't understand a lot of this, particularly the PEPRA and how that was going to affect us. Very helpful. Thank you.
And I'll make one other comment, is having it explained this way really highlights how we are going to be affected by the contributions and the employees' help in this. If it's not figured in the calculations, it's going to pay a bigger benefit down the road for us that we don't really realize right now. So it's all that more important that we show appreciation to the employees for their assistance in helping us.
Absolutely. Any other comments? All right. Anything else for the good of the order? Well, our next meeting, we're not having a meeting in December.
Right.
So our next Finance Committee meeting is scheduled for January, is it the 9th, I think? Directors, any other comments, concerns, questions? Ms. McFarland in particular, thank you very much for some excellent presentations again. You and your staff do your usual fine job. That's why you're CFO of the year, I guess. We appreciate it.
In January, we will be bringing you the results of our financial audit from Richardson and Company.
Great, always look forward to that. Dr. Jones?
No, that's fine. We just finished number 2, and so I was just going to anticipate 3 and 4. Do we need to take an action item on the, on what we just heard to accept the report?
I think it was for information,
Yeah, I believe it was presentation only.
Well,
presentation.
here it says recommendation, accept report action item, but that's fine, that's fine.
Is it?
Or am
The
I
clerk
looking at
says
the
that's the
wrong
one
one?
before, Director Jones.
November 14th? Okay, thank you.
We're there. All right, is there anything else before the committee? With that, we'll adjourn. Thank you very much.
Thank you.